Welcome back to the Two Promises podcast. Let's dive right into another exciting adventure with BD and crew as he pursues his new passion of one day finding the most epic bourbon. The Two Promises team send their special thanks to Hobie and the Huckleberries for their masterful theme music. So grab a glass, relax, and enjoy responsibly.
Baby says she's leaving if I don't stop drinking wine. So I switched to whiskey and I'm feeling fine. Drinking that smooth whiskey. No more wine. I like straight bourbon. Baby, you try the ride.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another exciting episode. I'm super excited to introduce you to some game designers that I met about 6 months ago at Gen Con, and they had a fantastic game that they were playtesting with a whole group of people all weekend long, and it was an exciting, dynamic, super fun game, and right in my little niche of interest, it was very piratey. So I would like to introduce Nick and Micah of Tortugas Games. How y'all doing?
Pretty good.
Happy to be here, man.
That's great.
For sure.
It's great to have you on the call. If you don't mind introducing yourselves, tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into the fun project that you got coming up.
Cool. Mike, you want to go first?
Absolutely. I'm Micah Tyson, and I'm an artist and a designer, and have been for probably over 2 decades now. I dabble in education, one might say, as well. Been teaching at the college level art and design for a long time, and so I'm primarily the visuals guy in what you're going to see: the illustration, graphic design, and other art elements to do with the game.
Yeah, I'm Nick Rayner, and I'm actually going to continue Micah's introduction of himself. He's the chair of an art department at a university, so he does a little more than dabble in education and art and design, those things. But either way, we're both co-founders of Tortugas Games. The primary game mechanics and game design is a lot of what I focus on, and since we're moving to actually make this something that's better, maybe not better, but more available than a treasured family heirloom, which is pretty close to what it's been so far, is a lot of the operations type things. So working with manufacturers and, trying to figure out fulfillment strategies. And then the other thing is that we're both marketers now.
Oh, man.
That is something that neither of us wanted to do, but we learned pretty quickly that we need to be marketers. So
absolutely.
That is excellent.
Background, just a quick background. I worked in the video game industry for about 17 years, more on the operations side of things. Most recently with Rockstar Games, before that, Bethesda. And I started my career as a game master at Blizzard for World of Warcraft.
All right, that's pretty fantastic. So you've got a lot of diversity in both of you guys' backgrounds. The gaming side, it sounds like you've worked a little bit more on the computer end, and now you're moving to the tabletop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, and on that art department, so I'm just now kind of getting into the art world myself. I'm a fledgling wannabe artist. I started doing a metalworking degree at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I was super excited.
You're thinking sculptural, like loving the sculptural aspects, working with metal?
Yes. Yep. They have one of the only blacksmithing programs in the nation. And so I was like, I was interested in that in high school. So I was like, I'm gonna go, refine that. I'm gonna go be a blacksmith. Let's go down there. So I'm using my GI Bill, headed down that way. Little did I know that it is not just blacksmithing. I am getting exposed to the entire art world, which is incredible, but I was not expecting it. So we have to go up like 2 levels in almost every medium: glass, sculpture, printmaking.
Wow.
And I was not expecting that. So much respect for you as being a chair. What's that?
What do you think so far? You enjoying it? Things you didn't know?
Oh man, it is challenging me in ways that I wasn't expecting. So yeah, my background is obviously I did 18 years in special operations. So I've been thinking in that, using that part of my brain, thinking in that area. and I've never really considered myself an artist. In like middle school, grade school, I just wasn't really good drawing and things like that. So I kind of got in that category. Oh, you know, got bad grades in that class. Oh, okay, that's not my strength. I'm going to focus someplace else. And so that's just what I've thought about, you know, that self-talk that you put in your head, that I've thought about myself like my whole life. And then now it's like, okay, now you've got to use it at like a high level and we're grading you on it again. And so it's been super challenging, making me use that other side of my brain, but also, I mean, so cathartic and so therapeutic and so helpful. So
yeah, man,
I have been really loving the experience.
Oh, you've got me excited now. So you got to send me some of your stuff so I can see it.
All right. That sounds great. Good deal.
Oh, and by the way, just to help with that inner talk, you know, you're actually making work. So you are an artist. And I'd like to just go on record as saying, as a card-carrying member of the art world, I hereby confer the title of artist onto you, good sir. Congratulations.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's how
You
I
don't have
will.
to worry about that anymore.
Thank you. I'm gonna use it. I will no longer go back to the other talk and verbiage. Thank you.
I had a guy that I was working with once who was talking about, he worked at an ad creative agency, and he kept talking about creatives. Creatives don't want to do this. Creatives want to do that. And it was so interesting to me because, you know, I don't know if it was more of an industry term, but I was like, I mean, everyone's creative. Like, I think that's part of being human is to create. And sometimes it's like how we see ourselves. So like calling ourselves a creative, like it's an identity that we're kind of forming. But like, in a sense, it becomes, well, other people aren't not creatives. Right. And I feel like, you know, I've learned from Mike as well. I feel like artist is something similar. I had this conception. So I've learned a lot from talking with Micah. You know, he shepherds people kind of through that transition, I guess, of like, how do we view this and then how do we own it? And so anyway, not related to the game, but and I'm not putting in the hard work in a class, but like you said, that perspective of how you see it is so wild that how much of a difference that can make.
Absolutely. That's freaking awesome. So I do want to say thank you all again. And for sure, like now I can say from a university department head, I have entered that category. So let's get into you guys' project. You mind introducing the game to us a little bit?
Yeah, this is an area that we've been working on, you know, and I'll just talk about kind of our journey slightly, which is, you know, I talked about doing marketing now, and we didn't want to do that. Like we wanted to make a game because we thought that would be fun and we wanted to work together. And we had done some creative projects before. I think our first one I can remember was a graphic novel that we never finished, but it was pretty cool. Had cool art. I thought the story was all right, but so the game came about because Micah was over at my house in Maryland. And one of the things to kind of note is like, we don't live close to each other. We haven't since college, but that's where we met. So we're 20 some years out of living around each other. But so he was there and he was like, we should make a board game because I was into board games at the time. This was 11 years ago, maybe. And I just said yes. And I said, but what's the theme? And he said pirates. And, you know, it's interesting to now see kind of where we are. And, you know, we actually got our first $1 last week. Oh yeah. Like someone gave us like, you know, kind of like, okay, I'm going from an artist or, you know, not an artist to an artist. Like we went from not being a business to being a business, you know, if that makes sense. But we had put in so much time, energy, and effort. We were, but you know, we just wanted to make a game, and we started and we worked through it, and life happened. But the game is called Red Tides: A Tale of New Caribbea, which we didn't, you know, it wasn't born that way. It was called Pirate King for a long time, or PK. And you know, I had a couple of ideas, some cool mechanics. I was like, you know, it'd be cool, and like it's like building up your ship and rolling dice and sort of using dice as like a physical, you know, when you shoot a cannon, you're shooting a cannonball. I was like, in a sense, the dice are your cannonballs. And so the more cannons you get, more powerful, like the more dice you roll. Thought that was really cool. And we were both being influenced by like a variety of things, I think, at the time that we just had in our minds. You know, I was thinking of a game called Memoir 44, which for any board game players, it's somewhat known, but you know, without getting into it, like the dice have different interpretations depending on what you're doing. Micah, I can't remember sort of which parts you brought first, but it was like a curveball around. I always think of Mega Man because I Mega Man, but
yeah, absolutely. Just such an amazing game and series. Take your pick, but just really loving the feeling of starting weak, coming up against these. I think Mega Man X probably does one of the best jobs of this ever. You learn to play the game in the first level, so we wanted it to be kind of a progressionary thing where it's easy to get into, but there's tons of beautiful stuff. And you get to the final boss at the end of the first level in Mega Man X, and he just whips your tail. Like, he doesn't even have like a health bar, and then Zero comes down and blasts his arm off, and you're like, what? And then he drops the bomb, like, but one day you'll be as powerful as I am. And so, like, there was this cool idea of like building your ship up from nothing, having these physical assets on the game table that grew as your power grew, your dice pools expanding as your cannon capabilities expand. And so that kind of Mega Man power progression we thought was really cool. And one of the really fun ways that that's integrated actually into the game is, and we'll talk about kind of the scope later, I guess, but like eventually you face these pirate lords who are like the underlings of the big bad, and they all have, much like Mega Man bosses, unique abilities, unique strategies that they're going to do. And so when you defeat them, you actually gain their abilities and their powers. And so it's different ways of like customizing your own play style within it. So Mega Man was a heavy influence for me for sure.
Yeah. And, I knew, again, very little about it, but what Micah said about like the game starts teaching you in the start menu. Yeah. It shows you a cannon blaster that's on the hand, and you press the shoot button to select which, one player, two player, whatever. And like, it's just so elegant and interesting. And so it's like, how do we make this simple game that like you can start playing like right away quickly, but then can grow into like you can gain mastery over time. And then, like you said, those elements of seeing the big bad and seeing what you can become right at the beginning. So the actual table presence of the game is sort of built in that way, where if you can imagine like a pyramid, at the top of the pyramid's the big bad guy, and he's off in the distance, and his card is literally bigger, and you don't know what's going on there, but there's tons of stuff on it. And then you come down from there, you got the pirate lords, and then you got the merchants, which you're starting, and they have the smallest cards, and they're right in front of you. So, I think working with an artist or a person who has an artistic approach to things and thinks deeply about them and what that experience looks like kind of started to shape those different elements, which is kind of cool. Which we didn't actually describe the game. You are an upstart pirate. Yeah, sorry. I don't think we answered your question, but you're an upstart pirate. You're working cooperatively with up to three other upstart pirates, and you're trying to take down the head pirate because 20 years ago, he basically won. He took over, and he kind of then put in all these rules to stay at the top. And so you're trying to sort of usurp his power. And so you start with a small ship, little, we call them old rusties, crappy cannons you've scraped up off a reef, a couple of terrible crew, and you go out and you find a merchant. You try and sink that merchant. You take its plunder, which gives you more cannons, gives you things and plunder that you can use back at port, and you're upgrading yourself, and ultimately you're able to take on that big bad all the way up at the top, who doesn't just try and escape like in a merchant, but has these like sophisticated tactics and that you have to kind of figure out, which is, probably the other two influences was, we play a lot of World of Warcraft and have for years. I'm a bit more off and on, but Mike has been consistent with, but it's like, you're working with other people and you're trying to figure out how do we do both a good job within our individual role. Mm-hmm. How do we contribute to the team? But also it's up against this challenge. Like this boss, this bad guy is going to do things, and we need to figure out how we use what we know and who we are, and how do we exploit those weaknesses and resist their challenges in order to kind of win. And so it starts with the simplest form of that. You're weak, but your enemies only want to escape. There's no real challenge there. I mean, there is some challenge because you're still learning, but that progresses kind of up and through. So World of Warcraft was another one of the things. There was a game that we discovered recently, another pirate game that referred to itself as a ocean crawler.
Yeah.
So it's like the concept of a dungeon crawler, but on the ocean.
Nice.
And we had actually come up with that. Everybody reinvents things over and over, or they think that they did. And we were like, it's not a dungeon crawler. It's like an ocean crawler or a sea crawler. But we were like, what does that even mean? Does anyone even know what that means? So we kind of threw it away. But we're like, that's not the game that does that. But so there is that kind of element of you are exploring the dungeon, but the dungeon is the entire vast ocean, and you're kind of choosing who you're engaging with, when and where.
Yeah, so I got to sit down with some of you guys and play test it with a few friends at Gen Con in Indianapolis last year, 2024. And I'd say outside of just already catching my interest because it's a pirate-based ocean sea crawling game, another thing that I just super enjoyed about it was how sensory it was. It is a very immersive and sensory experience. So like you said, hey, you're upgrading the cannons. Each dice is a cannon. You get that feel. You get to pick up the dice. You get to roll them. You get to hear them clatter. They're in these little wooden boxes. So you get the noise, the vibration, the feeling. And then the artwork is really incredible. There's a lot of really good line work. It draws you in. And then that kind of leads me into the next thing that really interested me about you guys' game that you're putting together is the merging of the mythical fantasy world into this Caribbean, like old school golden age of piracy gaming experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, we are Nick probably a little bit more so than me, which I'm thankful for. Like he loves history, he loves like storytelling, and just like being able to draw from such a rich point in history to do with pirates and naval warfare, and just like even the political climates and relationships and of these nations. And there's all kinds of Golden Age of Sail reference and little historical bits of flavor that we play off of in the stories and in the art, even like some of the plunder, how it relates to those real life things. But yeah, the fantasy element, I guess, at least for me, I wanted that to be a part of it, like to have these kind of almost sublime forces there, which the ocean in and of itself is a sublime force, but just like having these different factions, these great pirate houses and their history and their mythology. And, we were trying to think about, all the things that we loved about that, that we've seen in other genres, but also like, accurate little threads that we're pulling on from actual Caribbean history and mythology and the people that are there and have been there. And so that's a part of the story as well. And there's like 10 times more than what's actually represented in the game that we've got written out and fleshed out. So that's exciting for potential like expansions and different ideas for factions and things like that. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it didn't start with a fantasy flavor, and I don't remember the exact moment, but I kind of remember the process. Where it started as, okay, if we're doing pirates, like a ship, cannons, shooting, plunder, so that feel, like all that stuff, was a part of it. But yeah, it was a specific choice, and some of that started to come from, like the Golden Age of Sail, the mythology of those things, and that mythology was often based on real things, mermaids coming from like sightings of different sea creatures, and things like that, and that felt kind of cool. I mean, we typically try and describe it as like low fantasy, as opposed to just like elves and orcs, and it's this complete recreation. I think it's kind of in the middle, but that ended up presenting itself as the 4 different factions, because at first everybody was the same exact basic kind of pirate, and then we're like, why don't we move into more personality, but also mechanical differences that give you kind of a flavor. And so there's 4 different houses. You do have your traditional pirates, the Caribbea Cabal, big guns, fast ships, mighty crews. Like if you say, I want a traditional story of a pirate, of what they are. I will say we've enhanced that with some of the historical stuff, because what I've learned through this process of research is the way that we portray pirates in stories is actually often not as interesting as what it really was. Like once you kind of understand how bad military naval stuff was in the Golden Age of Sail, you immediately understand the draw of being a pirate. It's not just like a last resort. it was attractive. Like you had more autonomy, you had more agency. They had health insurance. Like you signed a contract, and if you lost a limb, you would get more of the booty. You know, there's so many of these interesting social things about piracy and kind of how they work that to me were so much more interesting. And it's like, okay, well, how can we integrate that? So, you know, you have this ability to kind of specialize your crew. And some of the things I've been thinking most lately, and potentially expansion content, is like, is the contract, like, you know, pirate health insurance, like you add that to your ship, which on the face of it sounds a little maybe boring, but if I saw that game, I'd be like, that is incredible. I love that they did that. And hopefully it's like it both can appeal to people that know that. When I say trivia, like that little arcane side stuff that gets those kind of people excited, but maybe it also gets people to ask, like, what in the, like, why is there pirate insurance as an option here or something like that? Got off the topic a little bit, but you know, so 4 houses. So we tried to make the ocean a power. And so there's a faction called Blue Realm that really draws on the myths, the legends, whether it's Greek mythology about the sea or even kind of like indigenous mythology from the Caribbean, or, you know, like your John,
Davy Jones,
like, you know, who's he's a real character that's a part of the Blue Realm, for instance. Like he's not just this thing that's down there. And then you got Firebelly, which are like they've just discovered fire and the power that it can use, you know, by making gadgets. They're like proto steampunk. And then you've got the creatures of the deep that are blown up to massive proportions or size. And if you're playing a part of that faction, you're like, where does the fish begin and the human end? You're not totally sure. So, you know, that fantasy element, I think, allowed us from a mechanic side to bring in a lot of new interesting things, but it's definitely richer on the story side and the art side. I'm sure there's a lot of different ways to draw a traditional boat and make it look interesting. But drawing a boat that has like manta ray fins just below the surface that help propel that thing forward a little bit more, I imagine, Micah, has to be exciting to draw and
it's so fun,
exciting like to play.
Well, yeah, and like one of the things that is so fun about, I think, the collaborative process between Nick and I is like he was so good about the organization and the information and the flavorfulness of what we're doing. And so he would literally be like, okay, I've got this idea for these 10 different cannons. Here's kind of what I'm thinking in terms of a name. And here's kind of where I'm pulling it from history. And it's literally just words and flavor. And so I get to go and research and think about it and do like 10 to 20 different iterations of a thing and draw it up. And then I would post it up. We were working on Trello and I would just throw up these images, sometimes an unhealthy amount of images in a short amount of time. But it was just really exciting. And so that we work really well that way. Like he's got these incredible ideas for stories and flavor. And I get to try to interpret that, as best I can. And he helps that refinement process too. Like, you know, we can get more on the same page of like, you know, I was thinking a little bit more like this, a little bit less like that. And so it encourages me to kind of iterate and keep the art coming, be more prolific, what I'm trying to do. So
it's kind of like magic on yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, it's kind of like magic on the flip side where I'm used to having something in my head and I say it out loud and that's kind of where it ends. But in this process, I can say it out loud and then it becomes a real thing, like a thing you can, you know, if you print it out, you can hold, you know, or whatever, which has just been very cool. And I do think the collaborative part is great in that you create something that you literally couldn't have created otherwise. And it's often better. You know, there's definitely ideas I've been pretty connected to, like adamant would be too strong of a word. I would say had a strong resonance with me and I felt strongly about it. But we start working on it and I say, okay, let me set that aside for a second and let's follow this. And we end up with something that was never in my mind to begin with, but is cooler, better, and more interesting. That process truly feels like magic.
Yeah, that is super cool. The way you guys are blending the elements and then you're hitting up on, hey, we're throwing in this historical flair. That's kind of where it started, but it kind of metamorphed into this whole different being. So some of the things you touched on was like that draw that there was to being a pirate in that age. Like, hey, the traditional naval sailors, they're under terrible conditions, unlikely to get paid, leaving for, you know, pretty much their whole life, leaving whatever it is behind, oftentimes press ganged into serving that role anyway. And then now you have on the flip side, oh, I could be a pirate crew where I have more autonomy, like you said. So I read a book by Colin Woodard, The Republic of Pirates. And yeah, and it kind of talks about how I
haven't read it, but I've got it on my list.
It's a great one. It's a great one. You'll really enjoy it. But it talks about some of those elements that you're talking about. It's like, what was that draw? What was that appeal? What did this age of sail or piracy mean to the modern world? And it kind of makes the argument that they were the first republic. They were the beginning, while it was short-lived, but they were the first group that tried to move away from the old monarchical governments that was seen throughout the entire world at the time, whether it's East or West. They were very imperial-based or monarch-based, and now they're like, no, we should have a vote. Yes, we'll have somebody in charge, but we get to choose when and how long and where. Yeah. So the way that you guys are blending the history with it is another just really intriguing piece to the work that you've got. There's so much depth that you guys have in your product and your game that it's just truly fascinating.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't read that one, and I certainly will. But like seeing those different things, like that concept of a leader being accountable, that is so important, I think, to how we often envision a good society. Like seeing that kind of start there, that was it. Like you don't just have power because it was given to you. It's invested by the people that are a part of this organization. And that whole concept is fascinating to think about pirates that way, because you just don't think of it that way, right? At least just like at the surface. There's a book that I read that's not on the pirate side, but was on the sailing side, called The Wager. I think it's fairly
fantastic
popular,
book.
Incredible. And it just gives you, you're talking about being press gang. They were taking old veterans out of the hospital on stretchers and sticking them on ships to meet crew requirements, like against their will. My goodness.
Yeah. And then going
I'd rather be a pirate.
On a voyage all the way across to the other side of the world.
Yeah. It is all those different things. And I think that as we see those or experience those, we end up thinking about ways to kind of reference that or give like the flavor of that, or, so it's almost like in the same way that the sailors of old may have seen, sea cows and they became mermaids in their minds or whatever over time. Is like those same kind of things, using sort of what really happened there. And then how does that play out in ours? And in a sense, it's almost like an alt history as well. So you've got, that kind of almost magic that sort of exists, but also, it's a number of what ifs. What if pirates didn't get stamped out, but they actually grew, and what does that look like? So, you don't say this anywhere. It's not, you can't go and like read the manual on this, but like you do get a little bit of insight in terms of like John Davies, the big bad guy. That's what he did. The reason he rules now is he went out in that moment in history where it swapped and piracy started to lose out. He wins. He then formalizes. And so, what happens in the formalization of that? And in this particular story, he actually just becomes what he had defeated, which is not necessarily the most unique turn of it, but, seeing those kind of things happen. The other what if I think that I really find interesting is, what if 90+% of indigenous people weren't killed by diseases? That simple change there. Okay, you've got now a different power dynamic in this area. And what does that look like, just from that side? So anyway, that part is really fun. Is that something you're doing in there? No, but you have some of these things that were important in indigenous Caribbean and the real world that continue to live in other societies today. Like, there were certain like gods that existed, but are now like children's heroes in Brazil, I had no clue about any of these things. So loving the history, seeing that, and then it being a gateway to exploring it more, and then bringing that, whether people know it or not, to the table. I really get pumped about. You'll have to shut me up about it, but it's like, if you want to dig, you can dig. You can look at the art, and Micah's taking inspiration from there and envisioning that and things like that. So anyway, Yes.
Yeah, that is so awesome. And like it does have that
Glad
like
that came through.
Yeah. It
you.
does. It bleeds through. It's like you are kind of feeling like, hey, I'm at a little tavern or something and I'm playing this game. It brings that feeling to it as you're engaged in the gameplay. So it's a very great feel between the artwork that you have that just gives you those visual imageries of like the different cultures, the different, mythical classes as you can kind of upgrade and like specialize and all of those things.
Thank you for joining us today on this curious roller coaster of life. If this is your stop, please exit peacefully. Enjoy the rest of your day. If you're ready for another one, just push play. Just a final note before you go, thank you, and thank you for feeling. The distillation and aging process is different for everyone. I'm not quite sure what you're ready for. Sip slowly and enjoy responsibly.
Baby says she's leaving if I don't stop drinking wine. So I switched to whiskey and I'm feeling fine. Drinking that smooth